Hello and welcome to this short session on using the Eisenhower Matrix to establish clear priorities and cut through the noise in our roles. Often in our roles in work, we are subject to multiple conflicting and changing priorities. We may feel overwhelmed by the sheer amount of work we have to do and the endless requests from those around us to do more or to change what we are doing. This session contains an overview of a tool called the Eisenhower Matrix, which can be helpful for cutting through the noise of a turbulent list of things to do and getting to the heart of what really matters. This can help us to prioritise where we spend our time and help us to feel more calm and focused each day. We're going to do that by focusing on the difference between important and urgent. The tool, the Eisenhower Matrix, is credited to the former US President Eisenhower. However, it's highly likely that he got it from someone else, and made popular by Stephen Covey in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So you may have seen or heard of this matrix as the Covey Matrix, the Importance versus Urgent Matrix, or the Eisenhower Matrix. All of those things are the same. It's a very simple way to help us distinguish between priorities by considering the difference between important and urgent. Often we think of these as one and the same, but when you consider the difference, you can start to see immediately where your time should be spent and how to prioritise. So urgency, if we start on the right-hand side here, has a short-term focus and includes those things that require our immediate attention. There are real consequences for not getting these tasks done immediately, and things may be urgent either because they've just emerged or because you've put doing them off when they are important but not yet urgent. So they do require our immediate attention. We can't put them off any longer because there are real consequences for doing them. So it's not to say that these things shouldn't be done. However, there is a real urgency around them. Importance, on the other hand, has a more long-term focus and is related to results and goals that are in the future. So they're not yet urgent necessarily, but there's a real importance and value in getting these things done. When we think about urgency and importance, we can think about it on a scale of high to low or more or less for both urgency and importance. And so then if you imagine putting those into a matrix, you indeed do get a matrix with 4 quadrants. So we can see here we can have high urgency or low urgency, or that it's urgent or not urgent, or that it's more important or less important. And therefore we have 4 quadrants: quadrant 1, quadrant 2, quadrant 3, quadrant 4. And I'm going to talk about each of those quadrants in a little bit more detail now. But really, plotting your tasks and understanding and determining where a task falls on this quadrant starts to help you to see where your priorities should be, and maybe the things that you could reduce or not spend any time on. So quadrant 1, and I quite like this definition of quadrant 1 as the quadrant of stress. Previous experience teaches us that if we don't do things when they're in quadrant 1, when they are urgent and more important, real consequences will happen. Typically, not so great things. Bad things will happen. So we can't put off doing these things any longer. We call it the quadrant of stress because these things represent real threats to us in our life and in our work. And we have to get these things done, but they come at a cost of a high stress response in the body and brain. And if we spend all of our time here, we will move towards burnout. So what we want to do with quadrant 1 is we want to manage the amount of things and the amount of time that we spend here. And ultimately, we're trying to reduce the amount of things that sit in here and the amount of time in here, and therefore the amount of time we're in this high stress response. So we can think of things as like dealing with crisis management, with deadlines, with pressing problems. They're high stress activities. We want to do these things first and reduce the time spent in this quadrant by doing more work in quadrant 2. And as I said before, tasks end up here because we have procrastinated when we could have done them earlier. Often, sometimes they emerge quite quickly. Quadrant 2, then, we can consider this and call this as the quadrant of quality. And this quadrant represents activities that are important. The trap, however, is that because they're not yet urgent, we put off doing them. These are often activities that require us to think hard. They aren't easy to do. Think planning, strategy development, relationship building, risk prevention, people development, long-term projects, and so on. Because they require more energy and effort, we tend to seek out distractions with the other 3 quadrants, often quadrant 3, which I'll talk about next, as a way of putting these things off. We must schedule time and dedicate our focus to these high quality activities. The more time we spend in quadrant 2, the more productive we become and the less stressed we feel. Putting off activities in quadrant 2 eventually shift them to quadrant 1, and then we get them done. But we feel rushed and we feel stressed, and we might not do our best work for these important activities. So what we want to do with quadrant 2 is we want to schedule our time, and we want to schedule time in which we can be really focused on the activity at hand and remove other distractions. Requires initiative and more effort, and we really want to spend more time here. So set up time in your calendar to dedicate to these tasks and hold yourself to account. Quadrant 3, I really like this idea that quadrant 3 is the quadrant of deception. And it's the quadrant of deception because the noise of urgency creates the illusion of importance. Urgency is defined by something as time sensitive or deadline driven. But if we really strip away that noise of urgency, are they really important? And probably not. So these are things like urgent emails you've been CC'd on, interruptions and phone calls, meetings you've been invited to that don't have a clear agenda or purpose, and maybe you don't actually really need to be at. Maybe it's things that used to be important for you to do, and now you should delegate them to someone else to free up your time to focus on the important things that are now, the things that are now important to you. People spend too much time in quadrant 3 for a number of reasons. We lack clear goals, so we say yes to everything. We're meeting other people's priorities and expectations, so we're doing things that are important to someone else, but not necessarily to us. We get addicted to this sense of being busy and doing things that are urgent. We look for distractions from more important work that requires more energy and effort. So think things like your emails and your to-do list. It feels good to do those quick and easy things at the expense of doing the things that require a bit more energy and effort. Not resetting our priorities following a change in role and still doing what our old role required of us, or maybe lacking clear goals in our new role. Or often doing things that we feel confident to do. Sometimes when we change roles, we can be in situations where we have to do things that we don't feel confident to do now. So we revert to doing the things that we used to do because we feel good and we feel confident about doing those. So with quadrant 3, we really want to try to either delegate that work or limit that work, or consider it maybe as quadrant 4 and we actually don't need to do it at all. So we want to empower our team if we have a team and we're in a leadership role by assigning tasks in this quadrant. We want to keep track of delegated tasks and check on progress. And we want to enable our team to do more independent decision making. Finally, quadrant 4 is the quadrant of waste. And things that sit in this quadrant are the time wasters and our escape activities when we are feeling stressed and really looking for procrastinations. So think things at this point like social media. LinkedIn at work can be a real trap because it feels like it's associated to work. Some admin tasks. Some time in this quadrant can be useful to recharge, but it is vital to time box it. So really, we want to declutter and we want to avoid tasks that are not aligned with our mission and goals, the things that are really critical in our roles, we need to learn to say no, and we really want to eliminate low productivity things that we do when we are procrastinating or really limit our time. So the research around this particular matrix and how people spend their time is very interesting. Most people spend about 25% of time in quadrant one, sometimes more, about 15% in quadrant two, about 57% of their time. So a large amount of time is spent in this quadrant three, the quadrant of deception. And quadrant four, most people don't spend a lot of time here. This research is a little bit old. I wonder if sometimes this is a bit more now that we've got this kind of addiction to social media that sucks us in all the time. How do you think we should be spending our time? Where do you think these percentages would be? Before I show you the answer, I just want you to have a think about what percentages would you put in each quadrant as the ideal time spent? So what is the ideal time spent? It looks like this. So we've gone from 25% in quadrant one to 20% in quadrant one. So there's an expectation that there's going to be a lot of work that is on your plate that is important and urgent. What we can see, however, is the time spent in quadrant three has significantly decreased, and the time spent in quadrant two has significantly increased, and quadrant four has decreased a little bit. So it's okay to spend some time in here recharging, doing things that are low effort, low energy, not necessarily highly productive, but we really want to limit that time. The big shift is really understanding what you get sucked into doing because the noise of urgency creates the illusion of importance, and how you can shift more of your time into quadrant two by doing things that really are high value, high important activities. So an exercise to do to kind of experiment and play with this tool, and we recommend allowing somewhere around half an hour to an hour to sit down and work through this. So it's an important and not urgent task for you to think about. Dedicate some time, create some focus. The first thing to do is to list out all the things you spend your time doing in a day and across a week. Include work and non-work things. So include your personal activities like exercise, school drop-off, being home for dinner, your commute time. You want to include all of that. So you've really got a clear picture of where you're spending your time. Consult your calendar if you're struggling to remember. If you really are finding it hard, it's useful to keep a little bit of a time log for a week. Just create a spreadsheet or just a note in your phone and just keep a log of where you're spending your time day to day. Then code what you choose to do versus what is assigned to you that you don't get to choose. So just create your own little coding, go through the list, mark each one as either I get to choose it or it's given to me to do. And then draw up your own Eisenhower matrix. So urgency and important, high and low, create your own matrix and transfer your tasks on the list from your list to the quadrant that you think they belong to. Now step back and review the matrix. What do you see? What patterns emerge from the completed matrix? Where do you spend most of your time? What's the difference between what you choose to do and what is assigned to you? How do you think now? What does this reveal to you about where you spend your time, how you feel, and the level of productivity and value for the time that you have? How can you now move your tasks around the matrix to better manage your time? And if you have a team, think about how you could better manage your team's time. What do you need to say no to? What do you really want to be doing, and how can you prioritize doing those things? And as you start to physically move things around the matrix, how do you feel now? Does it start to change? Do you start to feel a bit lighter? Do you start to feel a bit more focused? Do you start to feel a bit more energized and motivated? Just have a think about how does that make you feel? Finally, the last thing you can do is ask someone to review what you've done. Who can give you a different perspective to your ratings on urgency and importance? Who can push you to think harder or differently and to challenge you? Reach out to that person, share your work, share what you're hoping to get out of it, and see what emerges for you. I'd love to hear how you go. Send me a note in the comments. That would be great. Good luck.